thing, doing my thing. Don't want the fame, just trying to make change. They took out my page. But an infinite gang, infinite plane, playing no games. Infinite gang, we ain't playing no games. Infinite plane, I'm on an infinite plane.
Okay, we are going to go ahead and start. I'm a few minutes late. April 28th, 2025. We're going to pick up on a lot of the things we were talking about yesterday. Let's go ahead and jump into something else, actually. This was something that was brought to my attention by John LeBon's Twitter account. He did a short clip on it. There's some drama on the flat Earth, and I would not have foreseen this. But it looks like, I don't know how much longer David Weasel's going to get away with all this stuff. So listen to this. Patricia Steer, Paul on the Ball, Robbie Davidson. Sounds like a lineup, doesn't it? We're listing all these people who've been kind of, I think, maybe unfairly demonized. Because for the last few weeks, we've been talking about how, yeah, they're very coordinated and how they all seem to act like, they kind of made the same moves at the same time. They went from flat Earth to crypto to flat Earth to ball Earth, but in a very coordinated way. And I find that to be questionable at a minimum. But I never went so far as to say that they were criminals. I wasn't saying that these people were involved in anything more than possibly being bad faith actors, possibly crisis actors, but that's not illegal. I mean, it's kind of elite. To be a crisis actor, you got to have quite the security clearance. I couldn't be one, even if I didn't have a conscience. But we've said what we've said, but apparently some others have gone too far. So Marty Leeds and Mark Sargent and Flat Earth Dave have all alleged that these three were not only involved in crypto, but had some kind of SEC investigation open against them, and that they were facing 25 years in jail for crypto scams, and that their only way out was to claim, or rather denounce, the flat Earth, claim the ball. And this has been repeated by Sargent and David Weiss, who've claimed that Patricia Steer was given a car and Jaron was given a swimming pool in exchange for turning coat. But, that aside, the claims that they committed a crime went too far, and Robbie Davidson, Paul on the Ball, and Patricia Steer sent a cease and desist letter to Marty Leeds, Mark Sargent, and Flat Earth Dave. And it gets better. But here's what Mark said, because Mark was threatened with a lawsuit. He said, and these are quotes, "I'm going to keep talking about this moving forward. If you want to throw me in jail, please try to do it. I would love to see you try." This is Mark Sargent talking to his former co-hosts of these Flat Earth conferences. "You'll turn this into a circus, and the best part is you'll end up paying for it." So Mark Sargent is kind of baiting Steer and Davidson and Paul on the plane to go ahead and take him to court over his allegations. Again, this is still kind of somewhat developing, because for a couple of years, David Weiss has claimed that if you could provide any evidence of a globe, he would give you a Bitcoin. And he's got a couple of Bitcoins. And this has been an ongoing offer. And I always thought, is this guy really, truly willing to pay up? Or is he going to find some way to weasel out of it? And as it turns out, Will Duffy provided evidence that should have sufficed. In other words, he should be able to take his trip to Antarctica and basically get it paid for by Flat Earth Dave, who has the money to gamble Bitcoins but didn't have the money to go to Antarctica. So that's very questionable. But it seems to me, based on what Will Duffy said at the end of his video, that he might be taking David Weiss to court over the Bitcoins. So we'll see where this goes, but Mark Sargent baiting a lawsuit because it might be a circus could be fun. I put a video link. The video link is on my notes, which you can find on minds.com. Will Duffy does not have a sense of humor. Somebody made these action figures. Collect them all. TFE Action Figures, the Volume Studios. You got Austin Vapes It, Shillinism, and then you have Will Duffy in like a Hamburglar old school jail costume in a jail cell. I mean, these are funny, but he's mad about it. He actually cried about Flat Earth Banjo making this thing. I think he should be, people pay for this. In fact, I have a listing. I'm doing this for money as well. People will pay to have themselves turned into action figures. Now, these don't really exist, but they conceivably could exist if you have a 3D printer. And, it's not hard to make these leaps. But what's funny to me is if you go into the details, Will Duffy's got like a Mason symbol. Jaron's got a Mason symbol. He's got gold, which, I mean, yeah, that's what they probably used to buy him off. It's funny. I would buy these. If these were real toys, I would go right now out and I'd collect them all. I prefer bobbleheads, honestly. In fact, we should start doing, well, that's a side thing. Okay, moving on. Garrett says, everyone's making the dolls. It's the newest fad. You're mainstream. Am I mainstream or am I smart? Because I'm doing this more than full time and other things. And to do creative work, you have to somehow get funding. I don't have any grants. The CIA is not funding me. I don't get any Fed money. Russians aren't paying me. So how am I supposed to finance this operation? Well, I've been doing a lot of research into how to improve everything I'm doing with AI. And I'm keeping up with commerce. Like, how can I use it for affiliate marketing, for example? How can I automate a lot of things? So it's like having 50 people working here for me, but just me. And in my research, I learned that, print on demand, which is something I've been doing for a long time. Now, if you're saying there's somebody saying this is mainstream, I don't know what you're trying to say. Like, I don't know if that's an insult or criticism, but the fact of it is, if I can make money on art, why shouldn't I? I sell books. Books are mainstream. Live streaming is mainstream. It's very mainstream for you to be on the internet. Like, what do you mean by mainstream? I'm not programmed a mainstream believer in any garbage, but hopping on a trend is smart in terms of business. In other words, there's a consumer need or a consumer want for something. And if you can fill it in, fill it in. I'm not going to sit here begging for donations. You say donations. Like, well, no. You get a lot of criticism when you ask for donations. And last year I was criticized for being a cult leader. So I canceled Patreon to show that I could make money in other ways. And that's what I've been doing. In fact, if you look at my eBay store, I sold more than 1,300 works of art in the last couple of years. And now I've moved to digital prints. And that's because I don't want to be reliant on donations. I think that it's kind of a weakness. It's a crutch. And then you have certain people, and this is what I experienced with Patreon. Certain people feel like if they give you a big payment, that now you have to tolerate them, even though they're being wrecking balls, destructive, slanderers, etc. And I thought, this is just too much. Let me go ahead and take away that particular avenue of attack. So I've been working on art publications. In fact, I just took that ebook, which I released a couple months ago to members, called Anti. I made it into an ebook. Ebooks are mainstream. Hope you don't have a problem with that. Obviously, I don't really care what you think. I'm just being facetious. But we'll see. We'll see. In a couple of weeks, we'll tally up how many sales I've made and how much time it's taken to fulfill the orders. And then we'll debate the merits of my actions. Did I sell out? Am I a shill for doing print-on-demand products? Now, as far as actually making something like a custom anything, it's a matter of volume. If you can get a lot of people involved to, pitch in for the initial purchase, you can bring it down. Same with publications, like the tabloids, for example. One of my mainstream offerings is prepared to launch. It could even be a weekly. What's interesting is, like, a year ago, when I really decided I wanted to make this thing a monthly, I was limited by manpower, time, etc. None of those limitations exist anymore. And what's better is I can produce at a faster rate. And the work, I would say, is even high quality, better than what I can get from Fiverr. And hiring strangers to do this type of work isn't really viable, because you hire someone who wants to be a journalist, a writer. They want to build up their resume, and very few are willing to write for something like the IPS Insider, which fundamentally rejects mainstream claims. So what I've decided to do is rely more heavily on AI. And if somebody has a problem like we're being replaced, well, then do the job. Now, speaking of mainstream and reportage, Laura Loomer said something interesting today. She said, most of the people who are in the White House, news, media briefings are not journalists. Posting on TikTok does not make you a journalist. And I responded with a question. Can you really call yourself a journalist if you don't report on media fakery and psychological operations in the nightly news? Think about it. They're propagandists, not journalists, if they're operating within the box. There is no journalism on the world stage. It's an echo chamber. It's a closed system. It's sort of like science, for example. The concept of science and the scientific method presumes that your theory, your model is falsifiable, that's open to new information, that it's not rigged to falsely create an outcome or a conclusion. Well, the media system, similarly, should be open. It should be an open system. It shouldn't be closed. But what we're dealing with here with media specifically is a fictional universe, sort of like no Bugs Bunny in Disneyland, because that's Warner Brothers. Well, no media fakery analysis in alternative or mainstream media. So therefore, their reportage is just reinforcing a model. It's not real. She's a reporter on a movie. Somebody said echo, echo, echo. Are we having an echo here? I'm not really sure. I'm not sure if I'm being trolled or not, if you want to call in. But look, I'm not here to really deal with hecklers. And I'm not sure if I'm reading this wrong. So I'm just going to mute that for a minute because it's distracting. Like, am I being put on trial here for shilling? I thought we were over this. Back in 2017, I said commerce was a smarter way to go. And this is just because we're trying to proliferate a message. And I still stand by that. I see no problem with it. In fact, like I said, I'm doubling down because donations aren't really, it's not an effective business model. So let's move on. I don't know if I'm reading stuff wrong. Proud Boys leader Enrique Tarrio is now claiming to be Q. So this is new. But last week, I showed evidence that there's a White House press corps member who's part of Q, whose YouTube channel, when he was in the White House, which was used for White House purposes, had been scrubbed. But the name is still Anonymous Q. And not only is it scrubbed, but they gave it the appearance of having not been touched in 18 years. So you have this website, this YouTube channel, hasn't been used in 18 years. But you search the URL in the Wayback Machine, and what do you get? George News, White House press corps, just posting a bunch of boring White House press briefings for the entirety of Trump's administration. And I thought, that's interesting because it's the Anonymous Q guy, but he managed to scrub it. So I drew some attention to him because he's connected to Garrett Ziegler, who worked for Pete Navarro. And it goes to this area where you can pretty much see clearly that Q was run out of the Trump White House. And a number of people are Q. It's not one person, but all of them are right-wing shitposters, provocateurs, and psyop actors. That much is certain. None of them are JFK Jr. Sorry to disappoint anybody waiting on JFK Jr. coming back to save the world, but it's not going to happen. But the Proud Boys leader, Enrique Tarrio, is claiming to be Q. Now, this guy is already a Fed, but he said, I have a confession to make. I'm sorry for not telling you earlier. I needed to save America. Telling you would have risked the mission, and that's not something I was willing to risk. It cost me everything, but it was worth it. I am Q. So this is not an April Fool's Day prank. This is, again, this is like leader of the white nationalists, but I think he's Puerto Rican or something. Enrique Tarrio never made sense to me. None of these characters do. I believe he was sentenced to 22 years. They might have cut it to 11, but anyway, he's a Fed. Obviously, this whole thing was fake, but he's claiming to be Q, and I'm wondering, Are they trying to distract from the valid intelligence I provided? I mean, I've pointed a lot of people in the direction of unmasking Q. And by the way, nobody saved America. Nobody saved any children. They all got brainwashed into this quasi-religious cult. All right, moving on. We talked about the flat Earth drama, and so I got to watch what I say. I got to be careful that I don't say something that might get me sued by Paul on the Ball and Robbie Davison. I mean, I can say the truth, right? I can just say things that are true, and I can't get sued for it. Like, let's talk about Robbie Davidson's documentary, The Globe Lie, co-created with some guy who's serving the rest of his life in prison for abusing innocent people. Not just children. You know, the whole story was he was bad to women. He got kicked out of seminary school. Anyway, this guy became a Flat Earth Bible Society leader, and he joined Robbie Davidson. And together they created this 6-part documentary. They were BFFs until the guy went to jail. And then you never heard from him again, although Robbie Davidson's Celebrate Truth channel still sent people over there to the guy. We could talk about Jake Bird being infiltrated into the Flat Earth Conference to make them all look crazy with Davidson's complicity, and how Jake Bird inappropriately touched somebody. And before she could call the cops, Robbie Davidson interfered, as described by the John the Cop, who I met in person. When I went to the conference, one of the conference organizers actually took me to John the Cop and said, "This is the one." Like they were watching me. I had a Yeti battery. They thought it was a bomb. Anyway, that mess. We'll leave that in the past for now. Okay, moving on. This is an interesting one. The Pope, the hidden hand. So here's the Pope being wheeled down the hallway. And people have noticed that when he's praying, so his hands are together, he raises his hands and he's got a third hand on his lap, which would make me think that the Pope is CGI, AI, the AI Pope. And why would this be? Well, maybe he passed a long time ago, but they wanted to make it special with Easter and JD Vance. But yeah, this is the Pope, and he has 3 hands. There's still a hand on his lap when he waves. Now, this could be fake. I mean, it's fake, but it could be fake, not like certified fake. Like this is real news fake, but it could be somebody faking fake news. Because you can fake news. Fake news is fake, but you can also fake news. That's the unapproved, the non-designated. We are in the desert of the designated real. So this might not be designated real is my point. But if you look, the Pope's got 3 hands. And again, this makes me think something is fishy about the timing of his death at the age of 88 alongside Klaus Schwab. In fact, I made a PSYOP trading card that had exit world stage left. And it has the 2 of them walking off the stage because I think it's a similar archetype. You got this Pope, and then you got the other guy in the same costume, but his is black. You know, Klaus Schwab's outfit, his cassock is black. Space Chimp says, how many layers of fakery deep are we? Copaesthetic says, wheelchair is moving by itself. Nobody's pushing him. Yeah, it's like that's another thing. That's the type of glitch you would expect with AI, or it's a miracle. I'm starting to think this is fake, not just like this is AI that's not approved. It doesn't mean that the Pope we've seen hasn't been AI so far, or a mask, a bodysuit. How would you know? Ollie Goering says, I think the blackout in Portugal and Spain got to do with the system reboot. Maybe they're rewriting or erasing a bunch of data. Yeah, it said the reason for the blackout is unclear. And I thought that's interesting. Unclear. Just swap the N and the U. Nuclear. I thought maybe we're being prepared for the EMPs. And a literalist said, YouTube Q was a flat earth and others channel and had a different name. They changed to Q. Kept saying Q, question for everything, then JFK. Yeah, the Q movement was always run out of the White House. I have plenty of evidence to support this. And I'm just thinking maybe because I shined a light on it last week, they ran cover, but this Enrique Tarrio is not Q. And the fact that there's so much effort to cover up for him is really suspect. In fact, to prove his proximity to the president, he used to share screen caps of his georgenews.org emails. And in one of his screen caps, you could see he had a regular correspondence with the Washington, D.C. FBI office, the Pentagon, Ivanka Trump. Okay, so here's the real video. Okay, the first one was fake. This one is real. Somebody took the real one and ran it through an AI generator, and it screwed up on the hands. So there's your answer. It was fake. But we can tell the difference. I'm glad to see that people are questioning things at this fundamental level, though. Not trusting their eyes. You can't trust your lying eyes anymore. By the way, here's a question. How many of you, just be honest, how many of you fell for the mass sterilization panic in 2020, 2021? And are disappointed it didn't happen? Or at least the first part of the question. How many of you fell for it? Because I remember some people saying that we're all going to die. And I said, there's no way that the Democrats are going to self-exterminate before the election because they're the ones who are most vehemently pro-injection. Well, none of them died from it. That was a hoax. There was no Vaxageddon mass die-off. And as soon as I called this out, I thought, okay, good, we can move past this. We can get past this psyop already. And then they said, no, not so fast. It could be mass sterilization, and we're not going to know for a few years. So I thought, okay, they pushed the goalpost back. Maybe there's still going to be a Vaxageddon, but it's going to be a slow die-off extinction. It's not going to be all at once. Well, turns out, 5 years have passed, and there are no indications of any kind of mass sterilization. So if you promoted the idea that that was plausible, if you sent people to bed that night with the fear in their head that maybe we're going to die off, you're a terrorist, basically. You're a crisis actor at best, but kind of a terrorist if you think about it. Leo Friend says, a vax that sterilizes is the plot of Utopia, which means it's fake. Great show, by the way. In fact, I was just talking about Mark Sargent getting sued. There's the villain in Utopia. His name is Arby for Raisin Boy. And he looks like Mark Sargent, but he is the assassin the Illuminati send to kill the people who see the predictive programming in the comic books. So you have these comic book nerds sitting around, and they're all like reading, hey, look, this epidemic had this many deaths. Well, I'll see if I can find a picture of this guy so you can get a reference. They're connecting this with what's happening in real life. And then they're saying, okay, well, based on this, we now know that this is going to happen. And I guess if you had like the script for next year, you would be a danger to the system. And these characters knew too much. So they send in Arby to kill them. So that's the guy on the right, very Mark Sargent-esque. Again, Utopia, predictive programming. I think they canceled it after the first season because they made the anti-vaxxers the good guys because they went into the warehouse and destroyed all the pokies. Okay, moving on. I haven't seen the UK version. I've just seen that version. I didn't mean to get sidetracked here, but I was just thinking to myself today that, we're doing fakery deconstruction, and there are some people who are still under the misapprehension that it's real at any point or that it's going to get real, that there's going to be a doomsday. And so far, there haven't been any. And I don't see people celebrating. Where are the people who are convinced that we were all going to die celebrating? They just found something else to gripe about. It's like, well, we're all not going to die right now, but soon. 2 more weeks. Or no one else is going to be born. And I just think you should take credit for it or take responsibility for what you say and do, as I do. And if I had promulgated the idea that there's not going to be any more babies born after 2020, I would walk it back. Yeah, I'll be opening up phones here after we go through these notes. Apparently, there's a new Zombieland trailer where Woody Harrelson is dressed up as Elvis. And I know there's something in this series that Jurassic Liars talked about having to do with Elvis's Colt 45 gun. So we're going to have to watch that one. And then this is just our homework. We have to watch Final Destination. I still need to see Mickey 17 as many times as I've cited that movie. I should go watch it. Same with Captain America. At least 11 people killed. This is in Vancouver after a car plows into a Filipino festival. So I thought it might be some kind of a white nationalist attack. It kind of fits that. But they're saying it's not a terrorist, and the guy who did it was known to the police. It plowed through, it killed 11, injured dozens more. Now, I saw the crashed vehicle, but I haven't seen any evidence. I think it's a drill. And the reason I think it's a drill is that I haven't seen any evidence for it being real, one. And two, the festival's still going on. Like, you're telling me you have a street festival, 11 people die, dozens go to the hospital, and the merchants are going to still try to sell T-shirts and swag and whatever else the next day? Like, I don't think so. I don't think they're going to keep it going for 2 days after that many people die. Like, there's blood stains on the ground next to the food stand. I don't think so. So I think it's fake. If you think it's real, we can discuss it. I'll wait for more evidence. Okay, let's see here. Going through your comments. And by the way, if you want to get in, there's an invite link below, which I'll post. Widespread power outage reported in Spain, France, and Portugal. It says the blackout hit critical infrastructure like airports, caused transportation disruptions in 3 countries, and leave the world behind. The airplanes fall out of the sky. The cause of the outage was unclear. So I saw unclear and I saw nuclear. I kind of descramble these things. I'm not dyslexic, but when you study this stuff, you got to think like they do. As Aleister Crowley wrote, you have the aspirant has to learn how to read backwards, walk backwards, talk backwards. There's something to it. It's another way of encoding things, anagrams. And I just think it's a little conspicuous that it says unclear when we've been waiting for a big blackout from a high altitude nuclear weapon, EMP. Mizell says, I think it would be canceled too. Well, that's another thing too. I've been at hit and run scenes. I've picked up bodies at various, crash scenes, and it takes a certain amount of time for the coroner's office to do their investigation, to take their pictures, where the person was hit, where their shoes stayed, and where their body landed, and where, they do all this stuff. It seems to me that if you have that many victims, there's no way they could reopen that the next morning. I had the same issue with the Charleston shooting with Dylan Storm Roof, radicalized on the Stormfront website called The Storm. Anyway, when I saw that one, I was like, wait a minute, 9 people get butchered in the basement or shot. There's got to be bullets. They got to track where the bullets landed. And you're telling me that they're going to have services the next day, and Obama's going to sing Amazing Grace, and Clinton's going to drop off $29 million, and they're going to plant 9 oak trees. Like, no, I don't think so. The blood has to dry. You got to investigate. You got to do the forensics. All right, we have a couple of callers. Let me add Garrett first. Hey, Garrett, can you hear me okay? I want to make sure I didn't misunderstand Garrett when I muted him. I wasn't sure if I was being trolled or not. Hey, can you hear me okay? He's not muted. Let me add Leo Pirate and go with him instead for now.
Hey, can you hear me?
Pirate? Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, I think Garrett probably needs to edit his privacy settings or something, but you can do that in the studio.
Okay, good. So what's going on? You have
Yeah, I got quite a bit to talk about. Yeah, so about Utopia, there was the original show was on Channel 4 in the UK, and yeah, aesthetically and just as a show, it's much better than the US adaptation. But in it, that is the plot, and I think a big part of the research done at the IPS is noting that when there is predictive or concurrent programming, that means that narrative is fake. That is huge. That's a big thing. So it's like a cheat code, if you will, for being able to see past the fakery. Because in the show, yeah, that was the plot. Is their Project Giannis or whatever was that the vaccine would sterilize the population over time, so people would take it, they wouldn't know, and then over time they would be able to build their utopia. But clearly, if that's from a fictional TV show, then when you start seeing that in conspiracy alt media, that means it's also fake.
correct, exactly. The predictive programming always predicts fakery. It foreshadows fakery, fake events that are going into our history. It never predicts real things. That's not how it works. And I wanted to get your take on this because last night somebody threw this in the comments at the last minute. We were talking about the overlapping of the Mario Luigi universe and the real world with Luigi and the shooting and how this character has been adopted by leftists now as a symbol of their assassin. And then we were talking about how Elon Musk is in the madness. Well, someone pointed out that Musk was Wario in Saturday Night Live. This evil villain. And of course, in the movie, he's this evil villain CEO. But one of the things is at the end of the scene, Luigi shows up in the audience, or rather in the courtroom in the back, and he's about to throw a red turtle shell at Wario. So you have Elon Musk about to be shot, essentially, by Luigi. You see the connection
Wow.
there?
Yeah, how old is that episode from SNL? I have to look that up. That is wild.
It was a couple of years ago. He was still with Grimes. But the thing that stands out to me is that the CEO gets Luigi'd in the madness. And so then you have these open attacks on Musk, threats, the Cybertruck with the green beret blowing up. And I'm like, wait a minute here. Luigi throws a red turtle shell at him, or is about to. So that's some fascinating overlapping.
Yeah, that's incredible. That's so thematically consistent. So we're talking. I'm looking up the clip right now on YouTube. I'm just checking when it was posted on SNL's channel 3 years ago. Wow. So 3 years ago, they have this uh, in character skit where Elon Musk is playing Wario and is about to get attacked by Luigi. And now, approximately 3 years later, we have a CEO shooter named Luigi who inspires activists who want to take out Elon Musk. That is wild. Wow. How
Yes.
consistent the theatrics are. This world stage scripting goes back. It's so consistent and it goes back so far. And I think we've talked a little bit about marketing demographics. I've actually had a thought earlier today while I was driving that Luigi as a character, the audience fell in love with him, but which audience? The generation that grew up playing the Super Mario Brother games and the Luigi's Mansion and Super Smash Brothers games that have Luigi. That's a specific age demographic, and it's right. It's usually millennials, people 20 to 30, and usually younger. And those are the perfect age group for these activists that are so hell bent on taking out Elon Musk. But that's incredible. Wow.
Yeah, that's actually a good point too. The youth are not exempt from the propaganda. They're definitely target marketed psyop content. And yeah, this is an overlap between the fictional universe of Luigi and the real world with the madness and the real world, and then it kind of merges them two in a very clever way. And it's the theme is what's consistent here: the evil CEO. And this came out before he really fully embodied the evil CEO that the left hated, and that has only accelerated since. I mean, he became the bad guy from the series The Madness after Trump was elected. So the Musk character has gone through some evolutionary leaps here. And thinking back to when he was throwing out the Sig Heil salutes, I wonder, it was so flippant and they made a joke about it, but it was almost like he had to do it to signal where his character was going. Like that's a plot twist in his character. He's evolved to this type of ideology where he's dog whistling to these radicals, but it doesn't quite fit with his usual meme lord kind of goofy persona. But it almost seems like it was a signal of some kind. What do you think?
It's the continuation of his scripted character arc, essentially. And, you know, it's funny that you bring up that this was before he went this path that he's being presented to us now on the world stage. It's, you know, Trump was also on SNL, and now he's basically Cheeto Hitler. Like, he's the worst thing ever. But at one point, he was on SNL and, you know, had a funny dad move music video that he has. And now Elon was also in a funny skit where he's wearing, and now he's basically, you know, the Goebbels to Hitler. That's Donald Trump in the minds of people who believe the world stage is reality. I'm always amazed how you can point this out to people and they don't see just how incestuous and small the world stage is. It's like, what are the chances of this, supposed genius from South Africa appearing in this skit, and now is the advisor to our current president, and is this, you know, social media mogul that's radicalizing people? It's like, doesn't it just seem fake? Just like, look at it on its face.
I think people, for the most part, think this is just life following art, or they think that artists are antenna for the script of the universe, the simulation of the universe is somehow channeling its messages through them. It's kind of funny because in the view of the, I guess, the more mystically inclined, they look at Hollywood directors as prophets rather than as propagandists. And if you just replace these concepts of, you know, prophets forecasting future events in a mystical way with just the mundane, it's propaganda, it all makes sense. But I think you can't get through to people because it's really a big picture thing. And if you're in the box, there's no way you can put it all together.
And, you know, even the term propaganda has been, I still remember, like, in middle school and high school, we were taught what propaganda was. It was triumph of the will, these black and white propaganda films made by the Nazis showing these sweeping shots of the Third Reich and all these things. Yeah, that's, I hope you know, that's very antiquated. That's archaic. That is not modern propaganda. I mean, really, if you go back to Edward Bernays in the early 1900s, with him staging photo op with women smoking to encourage women to smoke during feminist protests, we have been given a false view. People think propaganda are just like documentaries or like films or advertisements that are just made to make you feel right. They can't comprehend it being in the news, in SNL skits.
Exactly. The concept of propaganda is kind of distorted because it's very subtle and you don't know it when it's happening. And that's, I think, why people are a little naive or arrogant to think that they're impervious to it. One of the chapters in Autohoaxology 101 is, are you dupable? And the answer is yes. If you think the answer is no, then in all likelihood, you've been tricked in a fundamental way. And I think it's important to keep in mind that we are all dupable. Like if you're at a magic show and you're stuck in your seat, you might know it's a magic show, but you can't prove how it was faked. And if everybody's presumption there is it's magic, you're not going to convince them because you don't have anything to say unless you're backstage. And that's how it is talking to people who believe the news. Since we can't show them 100% of how it's all done behind the screen, they just default to, nah, it's real.
Yeah, the big thing is context. Context is everything. Because if it's not like a Clockwork Orange where people are strapped into a straitjacket with their eye sockets open, forced to watch something, it's all very consensual. Like you choose to watch. Like I didn't even know this SNL skit existed, but I'm sure it has, you know, millions of views when it came out. That essentially is what it is. And the context, that's the main thing. The context is it's from an authoritative media source. And I think attacking the context, showing the media conglomerates that host up, like Microsoft, NBC, SNL, like most of it, these people then begin to question from, you know, just where this information is coming from. So it's more of a, I guess, being attacked from an epistemology perspective rather than the content. Because whenever I try to point this stuff out to people, they put me in the box and say, oh, well, then you're taking Trump, so you actually think Trump's a good guy. And so I'm like, no, it's not it.
You know, I make it a point to talk to people from within the box that they're in. And one of the ways I do it is I listen to woke podcasts. I listen to the far right podcasts, and then I keep up with the normie stuff. And I can communicate to people based on their box. And I realize that it's futile to be outside the box and make sense of them. The normies will ignore you. They won't understand it. The truthers will argue with you because they have their alternate view, and they're the only ones who are at least reachable. But that's not going to
Yeah.
change over time.
And this is something I've noticed for years because I've always been against Elon Musk because of his lies and overshooting his deadlines and goals with Tesla. He's just a total used car salesman, the monorail guy from Simpsons, just totally failing, not knowing what he's talking about from a machine learning or computer science perspective when he's at these conferences, making false promises. So I was always against him way before, but it wasn't very mainstream to be against him. And then I see more of my liberal-minded friends who are very activist-driven. Once this narrative is seeded that he's basically, Hitler 2.0, this Goebbels propagandist controlling the media, now they have a seething rage towards him. And I'm just like, you're really being told when to dislike someone. Do you not see that?
2 minutes of hate, like 1984. They're told, hate the person on the screen and scream for 2 minutes at him in abject hate. And everybody does it. And it's pretty much interchangeable. So here's something too. In the Super Mario Brothers movie, Dennis Hopper plays King Koopa. And King Koopa is based on Trump in this context. And the Twin Towers are called the Koopa Towers, and they are incinerated. They're vaporized. Dennis Hopper died on JFK's birthday. Now, that's a minor detail, but oftentimes the Trump character has this connection to the JFK death or birth date. For example, in Mickey 17, Mark Ruffalo, who plays the Trump character, a bullet grazes his face. He does a Trump dance. It's all based on Trump. Well, he was born on JFK's death day. And then, of course, we talked about these other birth date connections, like John Hinckley, also, born on JFK's birthday. But Dennis Hopper, Trump proxy as Koopa in a movie where the Twin Towers go down, and he's got the JFK birthday. Kind of interesting.
Yeah, it's just amazing to show that these actors on the world stage they have handlers and directors, and the roles that they're assigned and even their birthdays on the world stage and stuff is all given as a part of their persona on the world stage. It's kind of, I've actually been accused. Some people are like, I thought you're Christian. Why are you talking about birth dates and stuff? Like, what are you, an astrologer now? I'm like, no. I'm analyzing the gestalt, if you will, of these characters on the world stage, and that's absolutely consistent with Dennis Hopper, playing King Koopa, who was a very Trump-esque character in that old Super Mario Brothers movie. And in the new one, it's very interesting. They have the One World Trade Center in the animated Illumination Entertainment Super Mario Brothers movies that came out in 2023, and there's a commercial where Mario and Luigi are flying like Superman in front of the One World Trade Center. And I'm like, oh, that's a little strange. At the end of the movie, when they burst back into New York City and Bowser comes through, it's like the Mushroom Kingdom and reality. They kind of merge, they clash at the end. Mario's sitting in a diner, and that same TV screen with a huge crack on it replays the part where both Mario and Luigi are flying in front of the One World Trade Center, and it shows a map of Brooklyn. It's very bizarre. I don't know yet what that might indicate. It could be something pointing to the future, much like the old 90s Super Mario Brothers movie foretold the Koopa Towers, the Twin Towers, being vaporized.
Right. Well, we're looking at the overlapping of these various fictional universes, and the Mario Brothers thing, people pointed out before, has a lot of esoterica built into it. It's worth looking into again. And I only recently found out that Mario and Luigi are twins. They don't, they're not identical, but they're
Fraternal
definitely twins.
twins.
Yep. So there's another element to it. Now, speaking of overlapping movies and themes, Megalopolis. Right now, there's stories about this space nuke that Russia put up there. They said it's a dummy, but it's erratic. Same thing as we saw forecast in Megalopolis. What do you think?
Yep, it's just business as usual, and I really think people should stress the point that like when it's seeded in a Hollywood film and then we see it in the news, it means it's just as real. as a Hollywood film. Like that's really, that connection needs to be solidified. And I love the model you had mentioned earlier, that the silver screen is like the dreaming mind. So when audiences watch things in the theaters or on Netflix or later in streaming services, they're taken into this fictional world and their guard is down because it's fiction. It's like I'm watching a fictional movie. But then when they hear about it in the news and they see it in social media and people talking about it and having genuine reactions in response to the news, now it's real. And I hope that the work that's being done here with the number of examples we point out, it's like, no, those instances must be as staged. That's not to say that the news doesn't report on real things, but for these events where they're almost perfectly one-to-one paralleled in fictional movies, you can safely add to your percent chance of it being fake. And I would say it substantially increases the percent chance of it being fake.
Well, at this point, we've established a model, and that's one of the things I brought up the other day. The mainstream view is the model that the world is as it's presented on the screen and off. And off the screen, yeah, it's objectively real. Our point of contention is what's broadcast. And the conspiracy theorists say, no, it's the real world plus what they're hiding. And what they're hiding is this alternative universe of ideas. And that's kind of like their model as well, where your reality is still enhanced by the screen. The other group is just filtered through its frame of reference. Our model is that the entire worldview that it presents is warped, and it's built across a, I guess it's built on top of decades of lies, decades of fake news steering the news cycles. And, obviously it goes further back than that, but we provably demonstrate fakery, media fakery as systemic and structural, not just sporadic, not just the occasional thing, but no, fakery is its main point because it's producing our history. We're living through our fake history as fake news day by day. So our model is based on the idea that we're being presented with a map that doesn't match the territory. And the people who haven't taken that step back don't know it's a model. They're conflating it with the real thing. And this explains why so many truthers become simulationists, because they see that, hey, what I'm seeing doesn't match. And the difference between what is broadcast and what they internalize and what they experience would induce cognitive dissonance. And the way to reconcile that is to give themselves an answer that makes sense, which is reality's fake. And it's because the map is warped. So reality is warped. I can understand how they arrive at their conclusions. And I think that's a feature of the system, where if you don't buy into the mainstream programming, you're steered somewhere where you're fundamentally made into you have a schizoid break, which is where we see Trutherville today.
Yeah, I was watching a video from Calcified Lies. I saw someone compared me to him in the comments, so I looked him up and have been checking out some of his content. He had a great video on Stanley Kubrick trutherism, and that's such a strange phenomenon that people think that, oh, Stanley Kubrick is an insider and he's planting these messages about reality in his fictional Hollywood productions. And he argued in this really excellent video that Eyes Wide Shut was used as a catalyst for the QAnon Save the Children narrative, because there is a subtext of child trafficking at the end, particularly at the end of the movie when that final scene when they're in the toy store. And it's like, yeah, it's almost as if Stanley Kubrick was told these are the films that you need to make, and when you exit the world stage, this will be used to seed conspiracy culture in the internet age. And
Okay, that makes sense. And if you think about it from the very beginning, the Dr. Strangelove, which came out on 11/22/1963, JFK's death day, Dr. Strangelove brought about the idea of fluoride in the water being used to weaken the men against communism. So he's always been a part of creating the conspiracy subculture. Apollo 11 was attached to him, probably by design. I mean, it's true, but it was leaked to some degree. And then also look at his connections with the Kennedys. The Eyes Wide Shut comes out the day that JFK Jr. dies, and the whole Q story revolves around the return of JFK Jr. to avenge his father and save the children. So it does seem like the whole Q story was written by the same people who engineered the 9/11 psyop, the January 6th psyop.
Yeah, and he really went forward thinking with this idea that essentially this would seed the QAnon, the MAGA types, the red hats are the new swastikas, and that in the future, looking back, the MAGA band will be branded as like the American neo-Nazis. Like as much as we scathingly look back at the Nazis, we will scathingly look back at MAGA band. Like, you know, all of these people who are driven by, you know, conspiracies, and it will encourage a self-censoring culture in the future to not look too deeply into these things, because they're already dupes. They're already misdirected by default by thinking that Stanley Kubrick was on our side and that he was, you know, secretly releasing these ideas in huge Hollywood blockbuster films that are publicly available, right?
Well, there's a whole subgroup of conspiracy researchers who believe that Stanley Kubrick is this master. It's like this almost like the Rosetta Stone of movies. And if you can just decode The Shining enough, you'll figure out all the other big conspiracies. And what you find is that, yeah, Kubrick definitely was part of creating conspiracy culture. He did supply a lot of stuff, but they're myopic. They look at Stanley Kubrick as though he's the only one. No, every one of these directors that I point out is equally involved in foreshadowing fake events that happen in the news. There's so many of them. It's like, why single out Kubrick? And I think that the focus on Kubrick might be some kind of a limited hangout, so nobody recognizes the extent of fakery, and that all these directors are working for government propaganda, all of them.
Yeah, and they're already given a bad start by thinking that he's like, what is their evidence? They're using fictional movies for inspiration for their like save the children narratives and stuff. That's not good evidence. Like I try to tell that to people. It's like when you start using fictional movies and the official news narrative, you're in the box. You're using things within the box to prove other things that are still in the box. It's like step out, take the off-world stage perspective, and look more closely at the you know, the directors and their connections. And I bring this up because in the chat, in the last episode, I had talked about Conclave, which was a very recent film, came out 2024. It was brought to my attention that in 2009, there was a film adaptation of the Dan Brown book, Angels and Demons, and I decided to give it a watch. Would it shock you that the film takes at the very beginning of the film, the Pope dies, and the entire duration of the film takes place during the papal conclave? I was like, wow, even the intro is similar to the 2024 film Conclave with the breaking of the papal ring and all that stuff. But more than just voting for the next pope, a bomb goes off outside the papal conclave, which is something that also happens in the 2024 film. And it gets CERN. CERN is involved. Like they steal an antimatter bomb. I was like, what am I even looking at this? And this is how it works. It's you subconsciously seed ideas, and people are thinking, well, smart people made this movie, so obviously an antimatter bomb from CERN is real, and obviously people would bomb, you know, the Vatican and stuff. There's so much conflict going on there. Their frame of reference is shaped around fictional movies, so that then when they see it on the world stage, they accept it as real.
It's really clever. You know, that's what they do. It's there's this cliche that was spouted by far right for a long time. It started with Andrew Breitbart, who said that politics is downstream from culture. And he said this is what the, quote, cultural Marxists understood. And he pointed out how much the messaging that goes into Democrat politics is first put into the minds of people through entertainers and celebrities, which obviously that's true. And so they were making an effort to make that happen on their side by making a bunch of, you know, terrible movies like Save the Children and stuff. But yeah, this is a well understood tactic in marketing. So it's not even a challenging premise when it comes to our discussion over the use of entertainment to set the stage for fake news. Once you understand that the purpose of fake news is total control over history. And one of the best reveals of this whole premise is Megalopolis, Make Rome Great Again, about the fall of America. It is 100% about this premise here of history and time control, and controlling time through the what they call design authority. Those guys look just like the strangers from Dark City, where they're about to detonate something in New York. It's like, yeah, they're controlling time by writing history, and then our entire collective frame of reference is steered by what they spotlight. And it's always been this way.
Yeah, and I've always had an interest in film and, you know, with subliminals as well in it. But I think people, when they think of marketing, they think of selling like a product, like a soft drink, or maybe a new iPhone or something, but it's like, it's still marketing, but what they're selling you are faked news events are real. That's what they're like trying to sell you a future news event, which is staged. And because you've seen films where these ideas are presented, you're like, well, of course this could happen, right? And going back to Angels and Demons, it was directed by Ron Howard. And in the think tank chat, Synchromorpheus brought to my attention that Ron Howard, aside, he directed Apollo 13, of course, right? But Synchromorpheus brought to my attention, he directed Hillbilly Elegy, the Netflix adaptation of the J.D. Vance memoir in 2020. So Ron Howard directed a film about J.D. Vance's memoir before he was ever even considered to be a vice presidential candidate on the ticket with Trump. And he also happens to direct a film that, has a bomb going outside the papal conclave.
Interesting. Fascinating. Okay. Overlapping connections here. And this is a common theme here. We were talking about Leave the World Behind earlier, which was based on a book. And the book came out just prior to 2020. And people told the author that he was prescient, that he predicted 2020. So it's kind of interesting that this book that was noted for being prescient and predictive later becomes the basis of a movie that the Obamas put out, which also seems to predict the future. So it's fascinating to look at this because it rules out the possibility of mere coincidence. It's all about intentionality here. And the question is, well, who's behind it? Well, you shouldn't really find any difficulty recognizing that the information propaganda has the same source as the entertainment propaganda, and that it's for the same end.
And I should bring up something that Tomanoid3 brought up, that Ron Howard has a scene in Arrested Development about the fake moon landing. I noticed this from Calcified Lies as well. It has been very mainstreamed. You had pointed out as well with Fly Me to the Moon, of the idea of the moon landing being faked to fool the Russians, like it was this great accomplishment of mankind. Because it's in fictional films, what's the rule? That's a bad narrative. That's fake. It wasn't to fool the Russians. It was to fool mankind. But by seeding these ideas in fictional films, people are already pigeonholed into a bad, already a false premise. So yeah, it doesn't surprise me at all that he would make a joke about that.
It was also a comedy. So they presented the truth about the moon landing in the form of a comedy, and they also made America look cleverer than the Russians. So what if we faked the moon landing? We tricked those guys and got away with it, and we got there later. So yeah, we still golfed on the moon. Just because Apollo 11 is fake doesn't mean the rest were fake. That's the disconnect that people aren't recognizing here. That if Apollo 11 is fake, it's a house of cards. Every other space mission is fake, all of them. But they're like, well, maybe they faked that one to trick the Russians. But you're right. They can accept the premise that it's a propaganda victory against the Russians. Well, no, it's a propaganda victory against all mankind. It was a major reset for all of us in terms of worldview. But they certainly did release it in a movie that also made multiple references to Boeing disasters, while Boeing disasters were the topic of the day.
And it's just amazing to me because when I was young, I was always quite skeptical of the moon landing because of online content, nothing I would see on TV, but because of doing research on my own online and being like, wow, if they could fake something like that, that'd be something. But, I would never, ever bring it up in real conversation because even hinting at it would make people just have an aneurysm. They'd be like, no way, that's crazy. But more recently, because these Fly Me to the Moon has come out, because of maybe the Arrested Development example, Calcified Lies mentioned even in a new Venom movie. I forgot the Last Dance, Venom Last Dance, a mainstream Marvel movie. They made a joke also about the moon landing being faked. I was on a phone call with someone recently and I had mentioned like, yeah, these could be actors. Like, I think the moon landing is fake. And he's like, yeah, I can see that. A total in the box Norman is now on board with it. That's how it works.
Candace Owens has been out there calling it fake. Joe Rogan has said that it's fakeable, but they're all under the agreement that, okay, it might have been fake, but it's because we couldn't go past the Van Allen radiation belt, but all of the unmanned trips to the moon have been real. So what they do is they look like, hey, look, we're shining the light on this thing. People are waking up, but then they stop them from doing any real damage because none of the people with big channels who will call the moon landing a probable hoax will touch the space station, which is far easier to take down. And I've noticed this, and I've called this out for some time. And that's how you can reveal an agent. I said this with Candace Owens. If she's really a loose cannon and not just fulfilling a niche within the media ecosystem, she'll call out the media fakery and the space station, but they won't. Obviously, they won't. And then all these people calling out the Kate Perry launch as fake believe in every single Musk launch. So it turns out the only reason they're calling that one fake is because she's a feminist. So it's a very shallow take when they call it fake, because they're not following through. If this is fake, how deep does the fakery go? And nobody goes that far, but really us.
And because they have the wrong frame of reference, they then accept bad evidence as well, like the dummy hand, which came from something else. And I think also the Pope hand thing, that could be fake. Also, like these are, it's just the sophistry, the lies. It's incredible. We call this like moving the goalposts, but they move the goalposts in such a way that they can destroy and bring it back. They shift the goalposts a little bit back and then back to where it was originally.
Well, I made this point too, that the fact that there is truth or bait, that they put bad evidence out there to discredit conspiracy theorists, means they've got something to hide. Because you don't put out misleading red herring statements and narratives if you're not covering something up. So it's a dead giveaway. I put on my list of indicators of a hoax, bait. If there's some kind of bait evidence promoted by big channels that later makes them easy to take down, then there's something to it, and it's just advanced damage control.
Yeah, and I think everyone really needs to get that solidified, that if it's in fictional movies, then whatever, whether it be from alt media or the official news media, it cannot be. It's a bad trail. It's a bad lead. And in Mirageman, at one of those UFO conferences, one person came up to the microphone and asked him, it's like, have you considered that what you're saying is perfectly in line with the film Close Encounters of the Third Kind? And everyone laughed. And I was thinking, oh, you see, that person, they're onto something. You see, it's like when a narrative is perfectly aligned with a Hollywood film, it's bad. It's a bad lead.
Well, if you look at these things as anomalies and you don't study it rigorously as we do, you could be forgiven for thinking that these are occasional just synchronicities or coincidences and just dismiss any further analysis as obsession. I've heard a lot of very open-minded truthers who all lean towards simulationism say that I am too focused on nuance and details that don't matter. And I'm like, no, we've discovered a massive puzzle. It's got millions of pieces, and we're just putting this stuff together. And you can look at our puzzle pieces and where they're oriented and argue about their locations, but you can't say there's not a puzzle, that we haven't uncovered a big picture. And that's really what we have been doing here, is we're putting together a big picture that if you're really close up to the screen, you can't see it.
Yeah, I get the same exact thing. And I think it's because I've always had an interest in film that I like looking at. I would watch the extra commentary, like the making of all the, I'm always fascinated like how they make these films, and what's in the frame. I've heard it been compared that the frame, or this, the film reel, what you see on the screen, is analogous to the proscenium arc in the theater. And what is on the mise en scène, what is in the frame, what is in the stage, it's deliberate. And what happens is when I point out subliminals or quick parts, people laugh at me and say like, oh, you're looking too far into it. And I just go like, wow, they can't comprehend that level of sophisticated filmmaking, because if they were to film something with their iPhone really quickly, it wouldn't have that level of deep subconscious planting in their framing. So then that means no one does it, right?
That's been my take, that when you're looking at a movie, they're putting a lot of money, effort. You have art directors. Every single component has somebody attached to it. Somebody's taking credit for it. Like your iPhone, there's no piece in there that's not accounted for, that somebody's not making money off of. The idea that there's anything random in a movie is kind of like just, I guess, not understanding how these things are made. If there is anything random, it's probably low budget trash. And the better the movie, the more significant every single piece is. It's just very well thought out. So they're remiss if they're not analyzing it at a minimum for subtext, intentional subtext. And there's plenty there in almost every single movie. So to ignore what we're talking about is just to express ignorance about how movies work, and how all movies have elements of, themes, archetypes, and subtext that aren't obvious on the first viewing. And in our case, we're just talking about a deeper level of programming than the subtext, a level of programming that attaches it to the real world in a deliberate way.
Yeah, and an understanding of exoteric and esoteric symbolism is very important, because usually when I try to point things out, people think only diegetically within the movie's universe. So when I point out, like, wow, look at this, this guy's right eye is shot out, they're like, well, yeah, that was an assassination, because they're thinking in the context of the film's narrative, of the film's world. But I'm saying that the creation of the film itself was not an accident, and this subliminal being planted in this film is also not an accident for the world stage audience. So if they don't see the world stage, if they don't know about esoteric or subliminal messaging, it's not even, you can't even have a conversation with them.
Right. And one more point too is that it's not like you have to notice it for it to work on you. One criticism I heard was, the only people who notice this stuff are a handful of us on YouTube. And I'm like, no, everybody who watches it takes it in. Whether or not they recognize it at that moment that they're watching the movie is irrelevant. I think that these films are made with the premise that our ego is just this narrow aperture, but it excludes quite a lot so that you can maintain a coherent view of things. But just because it's not noticing doesn't mean that it's not being perceived, taken in subconsciously. And that's the whole premise of influence operations. They reach you emotionally. They reach you if it can't get you intellectually, but they manipulate you on levels that are through purely visualized. But what we're talking about are non-obvious, subtextual, or esoteric. And yeah, it's not only these random, directors or movies here and there. We're talking about, I call it systemic fakery, because it is structural synchronization between entertainment and news, because they are parallel propaganda conduits. One targets the dreaming mind, the silver screen, the lunar; the other the solar, that which is lit by the light of reason. The merging of the sun and moon in Kubrick's work Over the Monolith signifies this. And I think they've merged the dreaming world, the waking world, entertainment, and news. And the symbol of the monolith, I think, represents the singular worldview created out of this. And that's, I think, the reason why that symbol is so prominent in his work.
Absolutely. But I'm gonna, what is it? That's all I had to say. I do hope other people call in, and we got to get JL to call in again, because he's always got good stuff.
Well, we're getting close. We're getting close to 611, and this is a very interesting 611, considering the proximity of Final Destination Bloodlines, a direct reference to the whole story, the whole franchise, all being about a prophecy to destroy the Space Needle. So
right, I was like, Space Needle, like, where's JL? We need to.
Well, thanks for the call, and we'll talk again soon.
For sure, thanks.
Let's see here. Calm Down says he posted a clip from the Sinbad Genie movie, Mandela Destroyed Again. Okay, look forward to looking at that. Marcel has gifted 5 memberships, so 5 new Blue Wrench squad members. Appreciate the support. Couldn't do it without. And in the meantime, I'm selling CGI action figures, as well as art and prints and ebooks. Tomonoy3 says Nathan Crowley is a descendant of the infamous black magic occultist Aleister Crowley. Oh yeah, Nathan Crowley worked with the Nolans. Didn't he work on with Christopher Nolan on, was it Batman Dark Knight Rises? Lean Dion said, in a Rick and Morty episode, they quickly run past a moon landing and Twin Towers set prop while under the White House. Okay, that's interesting. It's very Newsbender-ish, because Newsbenders, they go down the hall and you see all these future fake events they're going to do. And they don't have the Twin Towers because they weren't built yet. It was 1968 when the movie came out. The construction had only just begun. However, and Seeker and Morpheus noticed this, in Newsbenders, there's a scene where a speaker and a shadow creates the Twin Towers. Pretty obvious. Let's see. Lean Dion says, oh, yes. Yeah. Here's the thing about predictive programming's mainstream. Mainstream is aware of it at times. They dismiss it as coincidence. Truthers recognize it, but they call it synchronicity or dark occultists. And I came across some comments like this today. I'm not exaggerating. I'm not straw manning. This is a common thing among truthers to take the things that we're looking at here and turn it into something that it's not. Like I had one person saying something about their, as in the people who are doing the bad things are trying to dodge cosmic responsibility for it, karma. Nonsense, misinformation. Dwayne Obith says Crowley might have had some unscrupulous practices, but I think he's misunderstood. Sure. I kind of judge not really him, but really his work. I'm looking at his work and what it's about, the movement, the OTO, the Golden Dawn, the offshoots, and then also his successors, Jack Parsons, Kenneth Grant, and what they brought into this, what I consider to be this new Aeon paradigm, which is the old world order mixed with science fiction. It's all been updated for the scientific paradigm. Oh yeah, we talked about the Vancouver thing, Drinkwater. Now I'm skeptical because I haven't seen anything convincing, and I find it unusual that you have an event where 11 people die, dozens are injured, and yet they still have the event go on the next day. The SUV plowed through, killed 11, injured dozens. But I'm thinking, and what they said, and I watched the news report, they said, the police will be riding around on bikes, but the public is safe, they've been told. It wasn't a terror attack. Okay, that's great. A police officer on a bike is going to protect me if a terrorist on an SUV plows through. Come on. Dwayne Obith says, I recall recently people on the far right were calling for truck vehicle attacks to mirror the fake ones in Europe. It's most likely fake. Well, I had considered that it might have been a right-wing attack because it was a Filipino event. I didn't see that line tossed out there, but we'll see. We'll see if that comes out. They say the person was known to the police, which is always the case with these PSYOP actors, by the way. We mentioned the mysterious Cosmos 2553 satellite filled with dummy warheads, basically a space nuke dummy is erratically orbiting the Earth, just like Megalopolis, where Francis Ford Coppola had an erratic Soviet satellite, which served as a symbol of a catalyst for societal transformation, a 9/11ing, which is what we're waiting on. Most of what you hear about Aleister Crowley is probably fake, but a lot of the stuff that isn't fake is honestly pretty disturbing. There is a lot in there. I mean, drinking the blood from distempered cats, somebody died from that. But as far as their practices and all that, they're not Satanists. I think it should be clear that they're not Satanists, but rather they worship Christ and Satan and every other deity. They don't really worship in the Christian sense either. It's more like they believe they are God and they're merging with God. It's this concept of like the Avatar, where the person becomes like possessed more or less. But that's actually intrinsic to witchcraft and Freemasonry and even the idea of the Pope being the vicar of Christ. So he's like a stand-in. And I think with the Masonic rituals, you've got the master is the sun and the other guy is the moon. In witchcraft, the high priestess is the moon. They call it drawing down the moon. But you can look into it. The Book of the Law is sort of their Bible, and supposedly it was channeled. I read it. I don't believe in these channeled books. I think he was high on coke, but basically it's this diatribe about what's going to happen in the new age. And it said that the old gods would be torn down, replaced by the child, the crowned child, who would be androgynous and would call out all of the old paradigms and initiate the new age after the world is bathed in blood. So I think that's what we're waiting on. Yeah, he did write a book called Diary of a Drug Fiend. He wrote Moonchild. He wrote a lot of poetry, X-rated poetry. So he's a writer and a poet. But as far as his heroin addiction, I don't know if it was like, I'm not sure how bad it was. I'm not really sure. I have to look. But he did advocate as his religion in the book that the goddess in the book that was talking to him, that he was channeling, said something along the lines of, worship me with strange drugs. So the way of worshiping was through getting high. So he was kind of a precursor to the rock and roll, sex, drugs, and music type of thing. And then I think he was also really big on what we'd call today cultural appropriation, but it was basically going to these different religious traditions and trying to amalgamate it into a system. But that's syncretism. And what I think that Jack Parsons' role was as his successor would have been the syncretizing of science fiction with the OTO, with its Gnostic Catholicism. That's what it really is, Gnostic Catholic Mass. And there's a group here. There's a couple. There's one in Santa Fe that was conducting these weekly rituals called the Gnostic Catholic Mass. And I thought, so that's an indicator here that no, it's not Satan worship. It's actually this worship of the sun, and they believe that the various gods are representative of celestial bodies. This Friday is Beltane. Yeah, thanks for reminding me. May 1st, Travis Scott's birthday, Church of Satan's anniversary, major communist holiday, International Workers' Day, May Day, maypoles. What do you think it's all about? The fires of Beltane. So I kind of think that anytime we see an escalation in political activism around May Day, I think it's also a way of perhaps not necessarily imitating, but functionally performing the rites of Beltane. So maybe the anti-Musk people will set some things on fire. Kill two birds with one stone. Leo Friend said it's not Satan worship, just sun worship. Well, I'm just trying to be specific with terminology and also recognizing syncretism. Like people talk about Saturn and Satan as though they're synonymous. Well, obviously they're not. But if you look into the symbolism and how it can be categorized according to their correspondences, and that's what Crowley was known for. His book 777 and other Kabbalistic writings is a series of charts showing you which deities correspond to others. For example, Odin, Wotan, Wednesday, associated with Mercury, the planet Mercury. But these are, different deities, but they're associated with the same planet, or like Saturn or Venus. These are all, well, Venus in particular. You got the goddess Frida, Friday, associated with Venus, the goddess archetype, but also the metal copper and the color green. You have all these associations that they put together. And so what I'm looking at here is that the symbolism can be decoded. And one of the most, I think, obvious sources of their symbolism is the OTO now. Yeah, a lot of stuff you see is Masonic, but look at the Super Bowls. The one with Rihanna, the one after that with Alicia Keys and Usher. Those two in particular were great examples of the Gnostic Catholic Mass, and the symbolism overlaps, and it's highly consistent as we have broken down. Let's see here. Calm Down says, I try to read Crowley, but it's like reading the Bible, super boring. Magic in theory and practice is interesting. It's enlightening, but as far as a practical manual, I found it to be lacking in real procedure. It's like sit in a chair, stare at a point on the wall for 5 minutes without blinking, and then walk out of your body. And what do you see? So I'm like, wait a minute here. How do I go from point A to point B? I understand concentration, but how do I just walk out of my body? But apparently they believe they do it. Maybe they do. Astral travel, the astral plane. And I noticed it's the astral plane and not the astral sphere. But I also noticed that many people who have drug experiences, have cosmic experiences, claim that they see the Earth, like from space. But my background with this is, I guess, there was a group called the Golden Dawn, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, and I got affiliated with one of their offshoots through a number of just random encounters. And I spent a little time there. It was very culty, too focused on yoga. I had a few issues with it. And at the time, I was kind of already aware about cults and coercive cult practices. And one day they tried to tell me to quit my job, just volunteer all my time at the cult, washing dishes while repeating mantras. And I didn't want to do that. It felt very much like coercive control. And I remember my link, because everybody has what they call a link, who's like a higher up that monitors you, reads all your journals, reads all your dream journals, and looks through what they call your magical diary, where you have to write down any kind of coincidences, any kind of occurrences. It was so controlling. And I was supposed to go up for some meeting, and it's way up in the mountains. And I was just like, I have to work. And they said, oh, that's your ego. Your ego is trying to keep you from uniting with your higher self. Like a lot of cults speak. And I had the good sense to break away from it at that time. Although, I mean, like I said, when I went, though, it was just because I wanted to learn about it. And it was this Hermetic order, which means, the Hermit is the 9th card in the tarot, but Hermetic refers to Hermes, I guess the Greek equivalent of Roman Mercury, or the Egyptian Thoth, the bird-headed guy, the scribe. So Mercury, Hermes, Thoth, and Odin, even all these deities associated with Mercury, for example, are scribes, gods of magic, gods of writing, the god who introduced the runes. So it's notable how all these disparate cultures and religious traditions have parallel deities that are consistent in their characteristics, and they are associated with the same planetary corresponding planetary body. And I find that to be very intriguing. I got very interested in the subject of syncretism when I started looking at various Afro-Caribbean magical traditions that had fused with Catholicism, and how you can find in certain sections of town votive candles for Catholic saints that are identified with the African pantheon. And looking at this, I thought, well, that's interesting, because apparently these secret traditions are all compatible on some level. And I came across this this concept through this writer, Colin Wilson. He wrote a book called The Occult. And he had made this point that a shaman in one part of the world could go visit another part and would find that it's the same fundamentals, even if the nomenclature is different. And this is what informs the whole branch of magic called chaos magic, where they look at magic stripped of any kind of Judeo-Christian or medieval grimoires, any kind of traditional concepts, and just look at, well, what is fundamentally going on here? What is happening in a so-called magical ritual? And what they found was that syncretism is the key to understanding how all these systems are actually arbitrary ways of interacting with the universe through one's what is termed in some traditions higher self, but that these are all compatible paths. The chaos magic paradigm is really about, again, the fundamentals of what's behind synchronicity, magic, intent. Are we co-manifestors, or are we just observers? Are we apes with big egos who think we're very important, or are we very important? And we might still be apes with big egos, but I'm saying here is that I think the question is, what is is there a purpose here? And the whole idea of magic implies purpose. And I find it fascinating that so many of these psyops we talk about have political purposes, but then there's this undercurrent, this what you would probably term the spiritual component. And the fact of it being there, suggests to me all the more that the media fakery is the main purpose. That maybe the deception isn't just psychological. Maybe the psychological deception is downstream from something even deeper. So I've made it a point in the last couple of years to study various magical traditions in depth to build on stuff I've already studied. I studied the tarot cards through a group called the BOTA out of Los Angeles. It was a correspondence course I took while I was in the military. So I was always bored. The real reason I left, I was kind of reflecting on it, is I got bored and tired of standing all the time. Hurry up and wait, standing around, looking at the back of somebody's neck all day. It's just like you're always standing around. And at the time, I was always getting mail in so I wouldn't be bored. And I took this correspondence course. The group was called Builders of the Adytum, the BOTA. And the BOTA is if you look at their symbol, it's got a cube, which they say is a symbol of the material world. And they walk you through all of the various symbols, starting with like the tarot cards from the full on up, symbol by symbol, and then they have you color it in so you can make the color associations. And then you realize, okay, there's a whole other subtext here that's being communicated in numbers and in colors, along with the more overt symbolism. And one of the points they made here was that, and this pertains to what we talk about with symbols and movies and all this stuff, is that whether or not you know the meanings, just focusing on the cards was part of the curriculum. Focusing on the images like it's a mandala, one of those symbols that you meditate upon. But the idea was that when you're staring at it, you may not be consciously aware of all of it, but your subconscious gets more information out of it, and that you're essentially creating a language for you to communicate with your higher self, that you're essentially using the tarot as a medium. So I go through this process of learning all these cards, and they call them keys. They called the major arcana, the trump cards, the keys. And they said these keys will open up the doors to your subconscious. I mean, the whole premise is really fascinating. It's far beyond just reading the future, which they say is a corruption. And it's also notable that the playing cards are derived from the tarot, not the other way around. So the 4 suits are the 4 seasons, are the 4 magical tools, and it's all connected to the sun. 52 cards, 52 weeks, 4 seasons, and all that. So you have this pretty clear example of esoterica in every casino. People play games all the time not knowing that, no, these cards have a deeper significance. And I think there's a significance. I mean, the meaning behind like the randomness in divination is that you're tapping into, or you're working with the medium of synchronicity itself, if you're doing it right. Assuming it's not all just, I guess, cognitive bias and the will to the desire to believe, because a lot of people want to believe and they get fooled by spiritists and Ouija boards. But I think behind all this stuff, there's some truth to it. And that's why I find the chaos magic tradition interesting, because they seem to strip away any of the dogma, trying to find any fundamentals to it without going so far as reducing it to merely self-fulfilling prophecy or the law of attraction. I have this theory, though, about synchronicity, and I've been thinking about this for a long time. And I was watching a movie called, I think it was called, The Swarm. And there was this character in The Swarm who's obsessed with this pop star. And her obsession with the pop star, she sees the pop star as some kind of like a goddess. I think it might be based on Beyonce. But she becomes a stalker. And as she's trying to connect with this, she has these strange coincidences. Doors open for her. Basically, it's almost like the universe bends to her will until she gets to be on the stage with this person. And there's this enigmatic thing she says at the end of the movie where they ask her, how did you find it so hard? How did you find it so easy to just kill people? how did you just walk through people? How'd you do all these bad things? And she said that she found it to be easy once she realized that God is an echo. Again, kind of an enigmatic statement at the end there, but God is an echo kind of stuck with me, because I think that one of the big tricks here, with religion in particular, is getting people to externalize God. So anything that seems supernatural, eerily coincidental, synchronistic, is presumed to be emanating from a higher source. Like the universe sent something to me. God winked at me. A higher power noticed me, or the universe is trying to guide me. And I think that externalizing of it is probably intentional. Because in my opinion, I think that this idea of God is actually an echo. I think that what we experience as synchronistic occurrences are really examples of our intent, our consciousness itself, I think, interfacing with the higher part of it that is somewhat compartmentalized. So in other words, I think that synchronicities aren't coming from a higher power, but it's coming from us. And that to attribute it to a higher power is, again, to externalize. And if you externalize it, then you're not the cause. If you're not the cause, no need for further investigation. And if you are the cause, well, what does that imply? And the whole premise of magic, and again, I'm not saying this, I'm just saying this is what the practitioners believe, is that we are indeed capable of co-manifestation. Reality is somewhat more malleable to those who have the focused will, the intention to manipulate it in such a way. But this path of assuming that kind of responsibility for what's happening is also synonymous with madness. And they actually call this process crossing the abyss, where there's a certain point where if you're going to start looking at the world with this as your model, that you're not this separate entity on this static world and it will exist after you leave. It pre-existed you, but rather if you look at it as you're a co-creative agent in it, that's a different model. But to accept that model is to also accept what would clinically be diagnosable as magical thinking, possibly even psychosis. So it's kind of like what Robert Anton Wilson called chapel perilous, this point where, and in the number 23, the character goes mad. So it's this idea of are you going to be able to contend with the dissolution of your ego to admit more information, or is that going to destroy you? Can you handle that? And a lot of people look at synchronicities, people noticing patterns, and they see it with trepidation, like, okay, you're looking too much into things. So it's a fascinating topic in and of itself. I've been listening to some Carl Jung interviews recently, and he's the guy who really popularized this idea. He was also into alchemy, which he understood to be a process of transforming consciousness. And that's kind of what we're talking about here. We're talking about epistemology, information processing. How do you take in the information you get through the screen? Do you take it in uncritically and believe every headline? Do you suspend judgment? Because these are two different models. One model is more honest and recognizes that we live in a world of liars, in a world of lied to, and that the lied to are the majority. Leo Friend says, in The Mouth of Madness, when they switch to Sutter Kane's town in his book, they see a cyclist who uses the Joker and the Jack card on their wheel. That's a John Carpenter film, In the Mouth of Madness, one of my top favorite movies. I'm sure I've seen it 7 or 8 times. It's that good. I like They Live, but In the Mouth of Madness, I think, is one of the best explanations for what we're talking about. Sutter Kane in this movie is the most popular horror writer, and his books are so popular they outsell the Bible. Everybody's obsessed. But what happens in the movie is he has such an influence that his book becomes the dominant filter through which the collective views the world. So the same way we describe, let's say, a religious cult that becomes fundamentalist about their holy book, their worldview is now separate from everyone else's. So if you look at a very strict theocratic society, you can kind of see, okay, they're in a different box mentally, and then it manifests in ways you can see outwardly. And I would argue that our mainstream media is the dominant worldview forming influence out there. It is the state church globally. So in The Mouth of Madness, this author's horror stories become the dominant frame of reference, and then the world becomes a reflection of that. Everybody goes mad. So in The Mouth of Madness has this scene where Sam Harris's character, he goes up to Sutter Kane in the guy's castle, and he's got a typewriter, and he's writing the metascript, essentially. He's writing it into existence, and behind him is a tear in the fabric of reality. So it's this black hole filled up with all kinds of Lovecraftian entities. And the idea here, I think, is that represents the chaos of the yet to be ordered, the yet to be materialized world. And he's the filter between the chaos and what is. Kind of like God speaking, let there be light, translating the darkness and chaos into order and creation. But in this case, Sutter Kane has usurped God as the dominant creative influence in the world. And I think that's what media is. And I'm not saying that media creates reality, but what I'm talking about specifically here is just worldview. And in the case of this movie, it shows how if everybody adopts a worldview and it's crazy, well, then everybody's crazy. And the person who's sane is going to be the outlier. So the irony of the movie is that he's the only sane person in the world, and he's in a padded room for his own protection from a world gone crazy. And then he manages to escape after the crazies kill all the orderlies, and he goes into a movie theater, and he's watching a movie called In the Mouth of Madness. So the movie's called In the Mouth of Madness. In the movie, he sees the movie, and he's watching himself losing his mind. He's watching himself as he, in the last week he experienced, eating popcorn. And, so the movie's very meta. But I think from John Carpenter and They Live, I think it makes a lot of sense. I happen to think it's a big reveal about how this place works. Leo Friend says, the best liars mix truth with the lies to enforce their will. In contrast to this, actual truth is self-existent. It doesn't require belief of anyone. It exists on its own and never ages. Very much agree with that. And the mainstream media is a liar, but it's a good liar. Good liars lie strategically to people who trust them when they know they can get away with it. They don't lie with every breath. They're not consistently lying where they could be called out. It's very subtle. It's an art form. They've mastered it. Okay, let's see what else. Donald Trump said something interesting. He said, I run the country and the world. This quote's been going around. I run the country and the world. Someone had pointed out, maybe it was JL, that Donald means world ruler. I'll see if I can find something on that. Jimi Hendrix told me he was going to die weeks before his death. This is from Michael Braun. Not an uncommon thing with all of these suspected death fakers is they all have premonitions. There's usually clues in there. I saw this interview kind of related to this. It was Rick Rubin talking to somebody about, he was talking to the singer of Weezer and bringing up this theory that Kurt Cobain faked his death and came back as Weezer. And there's the theory has legs. Like there is some narrative structure there to it. There's a story that connects. Jimi Hendrix told me he was going to die weeks before his death. Michael Braun is a fashion designer. He made clothing for pop culture icons like Bob Dylan, Jimi Hendrix, Hulk Hogan, and the Macho Man Randy Savage. Those outfits were made by this guy. Okay. It says here, Jimi Hendrix would send him handwritten letters. So I haven't heard this, but I'll see if I can find the exact clip here where he says he's going to die. New to me, but he was part of the group that is called the 27 Club. So the 27 Club consists of Jimi Hendrix, Kurt Cobain now has been obviously added to that, but then you got Jim Morrison, and who's the one that people say is Amy Goodman now, which I don't believe. There's a whole group of them. There are a few clusters of these 27 clubber type things. There's the Die Young Club, which is kind of separate from this. Let me go through my Twitter feed. Make sure we haven't missed anything. Bombshell, Roseanne Barr exposes the satanic cult that rules the world. Right. You know, for all the claims that the Satanists are sacrificing babies and drinking adrenochrome, it's like the only people that have, the only groups, institutions that have a record of this stuff are Christians, denominations of Christianity. And it's not just Christianity. I mean, I'm sure that the other religions are equally represented. Isn't there a religion, a very peaceful one, that does child brides somewhere? Like the Satanists get a lot of flack that they may not deserve. And the Scientologists get a lot of flack for being cultists, you know, and maybe it is a cult, but they haven't started any wars. They haven't burned people at stakes or stoned anybody. If we're going to compare religions. We talked about the final experiment and how Will Duffy may sue Dearth to get those Bitcoins. I hope Dearth just hands them over. David Weiss needs to just give his Bitcoins to Will Duffy. He should have paid for his own ticket. He should have gone to the South Pole himself. And we mentioned how Patty Steer, Robbie Davidson, and Paul on the Ball have threatened to sue Marty Leeds and Mark Sargent. Marty Leeds issued an apology. Smart move. Mark Sargent said, go ahead and try to jail me, which is kind of funny because you don't go to jail for slander and libel. Another big story, the fake plane crash that happened during the drill where it hit the helicopter. It's all about DEI now. Rebecca Loback was a domestic terrorist, people are saying. They're saying that this was a suicide, that she was being told by her male co-pilot, and they're all saying her male co-pilot, listen to this is AF Post. The investigation has revealed that the female pilot who killed 67 people after crashing the Black Hawk into a passenger plane in January was told by the male co-pilot to turn, but she did not listen to him. If only she had listened to the man, this wouldn't have happened. And I'm finding pictures of her hanging out with Joe Biden, because Joe Biden, DEI, Joe Biden hired all the short DEI women to guard Trump in Butler, you know, the Secret Service agents who basically made a clown show out of it, which was all scripted, by the way. They know how to direct people's focus. What they did was, we're going to fake the shooting, and instead of people analyzing whether or not it was real or fake, they're going to be talking about it happened because of women Secret Service agents. This crash happened because of women. You see how this works? They get you talking about the nuance of the story with the presupposition that it's real as reported. So this DEI story was also brought back with the other helicopter crash in the Hudson, because the Navy SEAL, and think about the level of competence that you have to exhibit to be a Navy SEAL and then a commercial pilot and a helicopter pilot doing tours. So obviously he was competent, but because he wasn't white, right-wingers, people like Ann Coulter, are saying it's another DEI crash. Well, if you're talking about it being a DEI crash, then you're not critically questioning whether or not it even happened. Here's an example. This is one of these right-wing types, and he's talking about this event. Again, it's because she should have been in the kitchen. That's the implication. Why was she out of the kitchen? Sorry, is the audio not playing? You're probably not missing anything. He's not one of my favorites, but I have to follow all these people. Jack Posebek said, female Black Hawk pilot ignored warnings to move before helicopter crash. It's from Real America's Voice. Again, this is a meme that's being promulgated, but the only people that are saying this are on the right wing. They're the only ones. And so anytime, and this is just axiomatic, anytime there's a bifurcated response to a highly questionable event, that alone tells you it was fake. This is a tactic, it's strategy. When they do a fake event, left wing has one take, right wing has another take. Each side is blaming the other side every single time. So instead of debating if it happened, it becomes more like they did it. Now let's advance our agendas. Another example of this, which is, again, this is how they do all these things, is this plane crash. It was caused by DEI, or it was caused by the fact that they only had one air traffic controller to do all the helicopters and planes instead of one dedicated person for the helicopters. Drinkwater says, wasn't this Black Hawk just a remote controlled drone? But they give the two narratives. Mogaturds say DEI, Libitards say government cutbacks. Exactly. That's exactly it. And I would even go so far as to say nobody died, because the Black Hawk thing happened during the context of a continuity of government drill for an emergency evacuation in the event of a nuclear attack in DC. So it happened during a drill. Every drill is a closed movie set. They don't do drills where it's going to be interacting with the real world. So that plane coming through, if that even happened, would not have been filled with those passengers. If anything at all was really there, I'd be surprised. I'm thinking CGI, but dummies, drones, highly probable. Regardless, nobody died. The thing was a simulation, and the response was part of the drill. So I think it's safe to say it was a simulation. But again, both sides don't care about it being a simulation, because the left gets to say, oh, look, our new president just killed 67 people because they fired air traffic controllers. Thanks, Elon Musk. Thanks, Donald Trump. And the right gets to run around saying, look at these female pilots killing people. They're basically terrorists. Legendary singer Elton John lost his vision in one eye from an infection. For some reason, this is brought up recently, and we talked about this because of the connections between Elton John, Elvis, Trump, and all this stuff about the eye wound thing. But even Jay Leno has figured in the story quite a bit. But there's a bit of a subtext here, just noting Elton John losing sight in an eye. We'll probably dig into that later with a broader context. Sarah Fields, this is some rando on Twitter. Sarah is censored, says Carmelo Anthony is not going to walk. He's being used as a pawn to start race wars. And when he's convicted, I beg people not to fall for this. Stay united. So there is this buildup around this event. And a January 6er is the main antagonist. And they're trying to turn this stabbing of this student who is going to try out for track, they're trying to turn this into something bigger. Now, it's going to happen regardless. I mean, if it's scripted to happen. And I see enough consistent messaging that this isn't just going to go away. It does look like a setup. And right now, Carmelo is free. He's got a mansion. He's bought a new car or something, but they've made it look like an outrage. Like he just cashed in on killing somebody. And I see the usual suspects pushing outrage on this story. So just something to keep our eyes on. Okay, let's see here. Drinkwater says, I hate the feeling of misplaced moral superiority of the masses of plebes adopt during these events. Oh, yes, exactly. When they say it's real and they're true believers, they're reminding me of religious types. Like, you're bad for not believing. Like, why don't you have more faith? Well, you shouldn't have faith in media. Here's one of my new PSYOP trading cards. And you can get these at autohoax.com. Just scroll down to the bottom. PSYOP trading card. This one has an exit. It says exit world stage left. And here you have the number 88. On the back of the cards, I'll have detailed explanations, and I'll probably even embellish these quite a bit before they go to print. But the stickers are available, and I'm using the sticker sales to fund the eventual card packets. I think PSYOP trading cards should be bigger than Pokemon. In a sane world, they would be. On the left, you have Pope Francis. On the right, you have Klaus Schwab. And the pairing is interesting. Easter, again, Pope, Vatican, Klaus Schwab, World Economic Forum. Very strong parallels here. I don't think it's coincidental. Calm Down says, didn't Robbie Davidson quit Flat Earth and Karen B and Paul on the Plane? Well, they quit with a letter. They wrote a letter after, and they all said because of the final experiment. But nobody was asking for their opinions. That's what surprised me. I don't recall anybody at any time saying, I wonder what Robbie Davidson thinks about the final experiment. I don't think anybody was asking for them to publicly join Team NASA. No, I don't care. When I call somebody a shape trader, I'm just being facetious, but it's a more nuanced conversation than flat or round. And there was never a point where you should have said, the Earth is this flat Earth model. You know, you're disputing the globe model. You have no business saying, I believe this one, unless you've investigated it and simultaneously discredited the old one. You falsify it while validating your new one. And that never happened. It was always premature for people to say they knew it was a flat Earth. It's not about shape anyway. It's really about worldview, open and closed information systems. The shape question really lent itself to becoming a straw man infused with religiosity and anti-science. And, you know, Mark Sargent is anti-science. But he can keep going with this where these others can't. If you lean on Bible Earth like Robbie Davidson, you lost the game. Bible Earth, Bible Flat Earth no longer exists. What Mark Sargent has espoused, and there's a few others as well, is the idea that we live in a video game. And that the question of a tree falls in a forest, nobody's around to hear it, doesn't make a sound. His answer is there is no tree. If nobody's there to see it, it's not being rendered. So that's a model that can't be so easily, it can't be falsified actually by anything. 24-hour sun doesn't matter. And if it's an unfalsifiable model, it's no longer science. It's no longer in search of information to test its own validity. So it can exist in its own place, but again, it's not a competitor for the globe. It's not an explanation for anything. But to say, I believe we're on a globe, well, okay, that's fine. You can say the evidence supports the round, the rotundity, it all aligns, but you are premature at claiming a complete model unless you can first explain what's up with space fakery. I mean, you got your complete model, but it's surrounded by lies. Okay, you got to explain these lies before you can say that there's not more to this model. And even if, I don't even think that we have enough information to know it all anyway. I just think that we're intrinsically blinkered being what we are. And we have to be satisfied with the best explanations and incomplete models. I mean, what's at the edge of the universe? You know, people used to say, well, what's at the edge of the flat Earth? I'm like, well, I don't know. I'm not saying there is an edge. What's at the edge of the universe? Are these questions, are they any different? Like, is it more ridiculous to say, I don't know what's at the edge of the universe than saying, I don't know what's at the edge of what the globe prescribes? I don't think so. I think one of them is just more comfortable with the explanations they've been given and possibly uncomfortable with the idea of having massive unanswered questions. So to say I'm no longer supporting this model is fine, but to turn your back on the entire community that you were in a dialogue with seems a little strange to me, because this conversation was always bigger than just the shape. The conversation was always about worldview, what we know it, how we contend with the fact that we don't trust these sources. And it's an ongoing conversation. And we're building to something. I mean, just the questioning of the big picture is what led many of us, myself included, to fundamentally questioning the reality that is being broadcast to us. So I see it as a very valuable thing. And the people that fall under the, I guess, label flat earthers are really just mislabeled. The term flat earther is a misnomer. Flat earthers are, if anything, media skeptics, skeptics of history, and people who question cosmography and cosmology at a very deep level. It branches into metaphysical speculation. So to just throw it away like that with a letter like, oh, because of the South Pole, all of you people are wrong and cultists and bad. Like, that's what Jeranism did. Jeranism is now an anti-flat earther. Again, I take the anti position. So I guess I'm kind of anti-Jaron at this point, because I'm not anti-media skeptics, even if they arrived at a wrong model that got dunked, because they still have most of it right. The people who went down to Antarctica, every single one of them believe all the fake news. They just question this one facet of the world, but they believe all the fake stuff. They believe January 6th. They believe that Trump got shot. So who cares about their opinions? They are reality compromised. Dwayne Abith said you should make a rule book for the trading card game. Okay, so the PSYOP trading card game could easily become a game like the Steven Jackson Illuminati playing cards. I've been looking into it. And I think with the help of Claude or ChatGPT, it won't be difficult to create a viable game out of it in that sense. And I'd like to sell them in packets. Like, I don't know, 10. How many go in a Pokemon, but just a standard collector's packet of cards? All right, let's move on. Calm Down says, you can tell obvious gatekeepers by their... Yeah, that's right. Did Weiss drink it? I know Dave Murphy did, but yes, that is true. And this is another thing we've talked about before, the pattern. So you have a group of people all on the same day. Hey, Earth is flat. Oh, it's no longer flat. Crypto's cool. No longer cool. I'm like, how do they act as a group? It's almost like they have a common directorship, a single puppet master. And at the time that this conversation started, it seemed like, okay, now they're all into this. They're all into the same topics at the same time. And they all got into this idea that you could become more healthy by recycling your whatever. And everybody was doing it on live streams. I mean, some of them were uploading videos of it. Some were doing it in front of mainstream media. Like, hey, the Earth is flat, by the way. I'm like, okay, that's got to be a setup. They want to associate flat Earth with insanity instead of people questioning the model they've been given. And sadly, that wasn't the worst of it. I mean, if you remember, when the mainstream media first started going to these flat Earth meetups, they talked to these people who almost seemed like they were plants put there with the express purpose of discrediting everybody. That's why they talked to so many criminals on parole. So if you dug into any of these people, you would find all kinds of nasty stuff. They were focusing on the blood over intent. How many of you remember the blood over intent cult? The YouTube cult where people were cutting themselves because they believed that if they wrote a blood pact, they would be able to, with the assistance of a guy calling himself Satan, find their way with a compass to the middle of the world where they would find a black hole that they would jump into. Because we're already, this is according to that, this is called the blood over intent cult. They said that we're dead and we're lost at sea. Some kind of strange metaphor. And that if you want eternal life, You just have to pledge yourself to blood over intent and run to the North Pole. I don't know if anybody actually did it. I mean, we're talking about the final experiment, people run to the South Pole, but we don't know how many people made the journey, and we just haven't heard back from them. Maybe they're in a better place, the North Pole. Has anybody heard from Quasi-Luminous? That was his name, Quasi-Luminous, who then changed his name to Satan. Fascinating character, although his content was very disturbing. I mean, there are some lines that he crossed, so I can't endorse him. But he was a plumber. And I found that to be somewhat ironic, because he's a guy saying that the center of the world is this big whirlpool thing, and you just go down it. And then there he is spending every day cleaning drains. But he had this whole concept. Again, I don't know who followed it. Drinkwater says, I remember Quasi-Luminous. He used to say this is hell, which I kind of agree with. Well, his theory was that this is hell, we're dead, and that the only way out is to follow the compass to the north and then jump into the hole. Strange. Not the strangest thing that I've seen on the internet, but the fact that thousands of people, so many people were doing this that they had to make that there were actually articles about this in the news, and they started censoring it, were people on camera on YouTube. And I talked to several people who did blood over intent. They would literally cut themselves on a live stream and then write their little blood pact on a napkin and then send it to this guy and then say, yeah, I've been saved. You guys are dead. I'm saved. I'm going to be in the underworld or wherever they go. Calm Down says, so Earth is essentially a big drain in the middle. And a plumber is going to lead us out. Drinkwater says, I nearly did blood over intent all those years ago, but I'm shy, so I never did. And I think you have to do it publicly. But as far as that goes, it isn't unlike stuff that I've read about, like Temple of Psychic Youth. That's that group somebody mentioned. To join them, you had to send them a bit of blood and hair in your name or some creepy stuff like that. I mean, bloodborne pathogens, haven't people heard? I mean, it's not even safe to practice these types of things. Okay, let's move on. We've gone down some strange tangents. We're waiting for that nuke to fall down, the space nuke, to shut down New York so we can live through Megalopolis. Trump is the ruler of the world. That's kind of a new development. Luigi, at the end of the SNL skit, trying to assassinate Wario with a red turtle shell. Now okay, I'm going to have to play this. This is something I'm going to play a clip from because we have been talking for some time about this overlapping of fictional universes with what we see in the news and these connections between Luigi and the assassin in The Madness who takes out the Trump light guy. It really does mirror this too well. So for Wario being, Musk as this evil CEO. Okay, here we go. Let's go ahead and watch the final part of this. Okay, I'm going to play the last few seconds. Hopefully the audio is working. If you look on the screen, there's Luigi.
You son of a bitch! You ruined my life!
Okay, he says, you've ruined my life, and he's got the red turtle shell, which he's going to...
Luigi, no! He's got a red turtle shell!
They cut the scene right there, and Pete Davidson gets in the way. But what do you make of that? Great find, by the way. Whoever posted that last night at the last minute. SNL skits or anything SNL, anything mainstream is just as likely to have concurrent predictive programming as anything else. All right, well, we will be continuing this conversation tomorrow. Things are only going to get more interesting, I believe, as we get closer to June 11th. Next month, Final Destination comes out, and it's all about the Space Needle. I mean, that's a pretty big deal that the entire franchise, these Final Destination movies are ultimately about somebody, a prophet or a psychic, who stopped people from going into the Space Needle before a big disaster. And because she stopped them, the disaster didn't happen. And because it didn't happen, death has been trying to catch up ever since. And the first movie was all about the crashing plane, and it was pre 9/11. So you have this fictional universe connection between 9/11 and the Space Needle. And these two I think are possibly the major psyops of our time. Like the second one hasn't happened yet, but 9/11 was the setup, but this next one's supposed to be bigger. Jurassic Liars talks about this a lot, but if you just look at the sheer volume of content preparing us for 9/11, there's as much, if not more, for the Space Needle. And the structure of the Space Needle itself, idea of the Tower of Babel, specifically America as the Tower of Babel. So the destruction of it is telling something on a subtextual level. And that's what we're waiting on. Calm Down says, do you think the West Memphis 3 murders were real or a hoax? I'm going to have to go look back at that one. I'll have to go back and see. Because there are some people who are sure that they're innocent. A lot of musicians and others have got behind them. I'll have to look into it. Let's see what we have here. China is rapidly advancing its military robotic capabilities, focusing on humanoid robots and specialized systems like robotic dogs. Weaponized quadrupeds. Deploying in 2025, AI-driven robot dogs carrying payloads, conducting reconnaissance operations in combat zones. Variants will be armed with guns or grenade launchers. Listen to this. Drone swarms, mass production. China has ordered 1 million kamikaze drones with autonomous targeting alongside missile-carrying wing-loom variants. Swarm tactics, and the swarm tactics here are clusters of drones. I see. Drone clusters. There's a number of articles that have come out about China's advancements in the field of autonomous warfare and killer robots. So there's something else to look forward to. Very James Cameron, Terminator 2, Robot Wars, and all this. And speaking of James Cameron, because I brought him up a couple days ago, we talked about his movie, The Titanic. And this is all connected because the Titanic sinking represents the West sinking, just like the Twin Towers, the Space Needle. These are all symbolic structures. So his movie, Titanic, of course, had a bit of foreshadowing for the Twin Towers with the Titanic splitting in two. And then he had jumpers in a very frightening scene. And then on 9/11, he was at the site of the Titanic. Well, something else, he's filming Terminator 2, and a bystander named George Holliday has his handy cam, and he's filming James Cameron filming Terminator 2. Terminator 2 has a bad cop as the villain. So this is a kind of a novel thing where the main antagonist is the good guy, the cop. So now the cop's the bad guy. So you have this storyline, this evil cop. Well, George Holliday leaves after filming James Cameron working on this. And what does he see? He sees evil cops beating Rodney King. Now, Rodney King was beaten for 1 minute, 19 seconds, and he was hit 33 times. 119 is strongly correlated with these repeated themes of the sky falling. Donnie Darko came out on 119, planes falling. The ISS movie, Where It Falls, came out on 119, and I've connected 119 as far as like how it's used, like 9/11. We know its obvious associations, and we connected 9/11 with Revelation 9/11, where you have the angel, the king, over the abyss, looking at the devastation, and then you have James Cameron filming ghosts in the abyss at the site of the wreckage on 9/11. We've made this connection here where now it's underwater, like it's been flooded, like it's sunk, or the ocean levels. The idea of it sinking has these connotations that are reiterated with Avatar, The Way of Water. But before I get to that, this video where Rodney King was being beaten is what incited the LA riots. So it's notable here that James Cameron's filming this movie, and then somebody who's filming it on the same film, on the same tape, gets the footage that starts the riots. And these riots are about the fundamental divide in America that's being played upon in these bigger psyops even today. So then fast forward, Avatar 2 comes out, and it has these Atlantean types. And of course, Atlantis, synonymous with sinking beneath the water. And the series Avatar is about Gaia versus man destroying Gaia. Repeated themes here, but in particular, when Avatar 2 came out, the World Economic Forum was having these meetings about the floods, these big floods in California. It's all about floods, the way of water. Well, at the time that Avatar 2 Way of Water was happening, you had the Atlanta, again, Atlantis, Atlanta, Cop City riots. So Cop City consists of about 80 acres of forest that are being leveled to make room for the cops to train right next to Atlanta. And the environmentalists said, if you cut these trees down, Atlanta's going to flood. So you have this connection. If you do this, it's going to flood. But the deeper connection was the environmentalists fighting the cops and the leader of them getting killed. This mirrored perfectly the story of the Na'vi defending Pandora against the encroaching Marines. And the Marines coming from Earth, representing the West and Western civilization, destroying the Earth, and now it's going to go destroy this jungle moon. So again, James Cameron has been consistently telling the story of the sinking of the West for its own good. He even called testosterone a toxin, which I think ties into T2, the main bad guy, the Terminator. And if you look at Arnold Schwarzenegger, he epitomizes this idea of toxic masculinity, steroids, big guns. It's all built into this meta script. And James Cameron, I would argue, is an almost more important meta scripter than Stanley Kubrick. Because, Kubrick obviously is one of the more noticeable ones, more famous, but Cameron's work is, I think, correlated with some major psyops, like, again, LA riots, these Cop City riots, environmentalism in general. I would even say that Avatar 2 was the new Blue Marble. You see, I was doing this mapping out of events, noting how 1968 and 2020 were correlated. There's like repeated themes down to the day, down to news stories. Like, it was actually, to me, very uncanny at first until this is when I came up with the term metascript. So I'm looking at these correlations between 68 and 2020, and then 1969 and 2021, repeated patterns where it was like, okay, there's some kind of, I guess you would call it a template that is being enacted here. And I was thinking, okay, well, what's going to happen on the anniversary or the corresponding event to Blue Marble? So the significance of the Blue Marble photo was it put us all on the same sheet, but it's also known for having kicked off environmentalism, because when we saw that, it essentially put us all on notice that Earth is in danger, that we're going to have to make some changes. Well, that was 1972. And I would argue that Avatar 2 was the corresponding psyop to the Blue Marble. that they're reaching the mass audience with this idea that Gaia is in trouble. We have to stop the West. Gaia is in trouble. We have to stop capitalism and man overusing Gaia's resources, or it's going to die. And Avatar 2 was noted for being blue, all about blue. You're immersed in water, the color blue. The storyline was dances with wolves, crossed with Fern Gully, the usual stuff, but symbolically, or rather, I think thematically, it was blue marble all over again. And if you look at the coverage of it and how it was associated with the World Economic Forum's pleas for us to embrace environmentalism over use of the fossil fuels because we're going to kill Gaia. Yeah, it was a match. My point being, these meta scripters, they're doing propaganda, but they're really doing worldview shaping. They are painting up the zeitgeist, and their role is bigger than simply these individual psyops. They're actually building the world that we live in. Calm Down says eco-terrorists appear to be psyops or duped extremists. I tend to think so too. I would argue that most of them are dupes, but it's overall a psyop. But it's not hard to find lefties to feel justification in destroying private property. It's morally justifiable for them. You have that group called Stop Oil, and they vandalize oil paintings. Like, I don't know what the message is there, but I see these idiots lying down in the streets, and they are what you would call useful stooges or useful idiots, where you do have a lot of true believers, especially on the left. Now, I'm not exonerating. The right wing does have its dupes. I mean, look at the MAGAs, but January 6th is a good example. People think that a lot of innocent people got caught up in it. No, that's not how it really went down. January 6th was a hoax. The insurrection was a hoax. The speech at the Ellipse was still going on when the riots started. Trump was still talking to them when it happened. And from the Ellipse to the Capitol was a 45-minute walk. So how do you explain that? Well, the people who were there at the front were trained actors ready to perform this thing. Meanwhile, all of these, I guess, just normies were out of sight, out of mind. They weren't really able to get there on time. They didn't see anything. They didn't know that Ashley Babbitt didn't really die. And anybody who still supports Trump and MAGA and politics is, I think, operating under the presumption that Trump is the exception to the rule, that they're following the truth and that they are not dupes, that they're not useful stooges, just like the environmentalists. Now, I'm sorry, but if you're if you're in the political horseshoe, left or right, you're just as bad as Extinction Rebellion, throwing tomato sauce on paintings to save Gaia. Like, it is that bad. If you still think Trump got shot, you're a dupe. If you think that he didn't get shot and he faked it because he was tricking the deep state, then you are experiencing Stockholm syndrome of some kind. And you're lying on behalf of a liar because comfort zones. Don't want to get outside of this protective bubble. Laura Loomer, again, I want to repeat what she had said. Most of the people who are in the White House, news media briefings, are not journalists. Posting on TikTok doesn't make you a journalist. And I said to her, can you call yourself a journalist if you don't report media fakery and psychological operations in the nightly news? Either she doesn't know or she knows and she's not telling. And this goes for any of these media types that people are that you're meant to follow, these influencers. They're either A, in the know, or B, they haven't figured it out. So who do you want to follow? Somebody who is willingly and knowingly deceiving you, or somebody who's not aware, not situationally aware of what's happening. If they don't have a level of situational awareness to know that they're being mind controlled, why would you follow them? You have to be your own source. And I'm only following these people because I'm studying them. We're looking at the media landscape. We're looking at the worldview as it's perceived in the different chambers and subsets. So I know how mainstreamers interpret the news. I know how the wokies and the alt wokes do. I mean, what we're doing here is simply just, ideology. And it's important, I think, to be informed rather than uninformed. Because if you don't pay attention, when they blow something up, when they lock us down next or whatever they're going to do, you're not going to know the truth and how to get to it even. You're not going to have a pathway to figuring things out if you haven't been maintaining a certain level of awareness about things. Sticking your head in the sand is not a solution. The masses are misinformed. The people not paying attention are uninformed, but there is another alternative, and that is being informed, which is what we strive to be. So we have 145 people listening on the video streams. I appreciate you all listening. Appreciate the support, the content, the comments. The research here is unparalleled. We've got about 30 people listening on audio. So if you're listening on the audio streams, you will get, you can just join the chat. Just go to ips.monster. Also, I'm updating these nightly. So if you go to the 24/7 audio streams, it's always going to be playing the last 2 or 3 days, and I'm keeping it current. We talked a little bit about Utopia and Arby, Raisin Boy, Mark Sargent, killing the conspiracy theorists who figured out how fake everything is. Very interesting movie if you haven't seen it. I mean, it's gory. What do they call it? Enucleation? When they rip somebody's eyeball out? I mean, they ripped some guy's eye out with a spoon, I think, early on. Very grotesque, but worth watching. Utopia has what you would call, I think what we could call a crisis actor island. Like Utopia actually is the place where the actors who fake like they had some kind of a flu, where they go to. They're completely separate from everybody else. And we often joke about crisis actor island. Like, these people obviously have to go somewhere. Where do they go in between psyops? Is there a separate location for them? And Utopia has specifically that, where the people who are faking the news have a separate island somewhere, and they come in, do their stories, and then they leave. In fact, the movie or the series Utopia was probably way too revealing of the methodology and everything else. So they had to cancel it. I mean, you do find examples of intended predictive programming that's so close that they have to scrub it, cancel it, alter it. We have numerous examples. I can point to at least 2 with the Trump shooting movies that had to change their trailers because of it. Now, I haven't heard Tim Burton mention the dead Donald Trump in the netherworld in the golden suit in Beetlejuice, which came out September, just a couple of months after the event. Like, nobody's called out Tim Burton on that. I mean, I did. I posted pictures, and for the first time, I had a tweet pulled down for copyright. I took a screen cap of the Trump character, and my tweet got yanked. And it's because I tweeted directly at Tim Burton. I said, hey, your movie has a dead Trump in the underworld. And it's Trump. Gold suit, flag, lapel pin, undeniable. All right, I appreciate the comments and everything. This is
I mean, we're all going to die someday.
This is a new Pope.
And if you're going to pick someplace
Pope
to die,
Elon.
then
See you
why not
all
Mars?
tomorrow.
If we're born on Earth, why not die on Mars? Seems like maybe it'd be kind of exciting. But so I think, given the choice of dying on Earth or dying on Mars, I'd say, yeah, sure, I'll die on Mars.
Father, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come. Give us each our daily bread, and forgive us our sins. For we ourselves forgive everyone who is indebted to us. And lead us not into temptation. Did you drive your car too long? Do yourself make space? Hiding behind a Tesla's name, afraid the sheep will wake. Will you save us from our sins? Will you help us to begin to feel the place we can't call home? The mom's company of our home. Playing a game with all the souls who don't know deception is your name. Oh, belong.
And you can tell it's real because it looks so fake.